it's a great project, it's a great plan. But Anand, I'm going to come back to the whole question of how do you wire up a country that's so complicated? At the ground level, what are the challenges you're facing and how do you see this panning out, let's say, over the next 4 or 5 years?
The issues that have been till date were more in terms of creating the right framework. I think those challenges are, the execution has not really started. The execution was not a problem. The problem was getting the state governments aligned, making sure the private sector is fully aligned to the program, and then bidding it out. So I think all that's currently happening as we speak. And while the challenge is big, but it's not unsurmountable. And it's a great vision of connecting 250,000 panchayats, and it will require a degree, what Arnab said, of passion, experience, and patience.
Right. No, Sanjay, you've been the CEO of India's largest telecom company. Now we know that just laying a fiber isn't good enough. Something needs to ride on it. So how do you see that challenge being met?
When I look at this whole digital India, without access being formulated, everything else is a pipe dream, right? And access comes in two forms in a country like us. One, what my friend said about the fiber, and no matter which part of the world you go to, when wireless went up, wired went up at probably a faster pace.
I see.
And India has a problem with that, to say, how do you wire such a large country? How do you wire that so quickly? Because whatever wire we talk about in the country that was laid 15 years earlier is either obsolete or ending life almost, because that's the life. So I think all of us are sitting on a tangent where unless and until access is addressed going forward, we are going to be in a limbo on this digital India.
I think there's really two problems we're trying to solve here. And it sounds like if you just hear what everybody's talking about, first is create the connectivity. Once you have the connectivity, I think it's a challenge from saying what do consumers want and what do they need, right? So we know what they want, and that's where the entrepreneurial ecosystem is very innovative in figuring out the next cool things that'll be interesting and that'll add value from that perspective. I agree that when we think about what do we need, I think there is a need to digitize a lot of things that are very analog today. And I think I believe the entrepreneurial ecosystem can really fill 90% of that void. But when it comes to interfacing with government, it's fundamentally a government's choice to do it. And I think the government here does have the intention.
Jerome, you are someone who watches India from a distance, and you're actually putting your money here when you have the option of picking other countries as well, other emerging markets. So what do you think will work really for this country, and what sort of a promise do you see coming from this whole Digital India initiative?
For me, content is massively important, and we've mentioned a little bit about that. But so is affordability. But I mean, we need also, I think, to really look at public space Wi-Fi, because for a lot of people, you can use, a lower grade mobile, and you can get access. People who are really not going to get access otherwise. What I'd be looking for is a country which has huge long-term potential, an undervalued exchange rate, a very clear sense of very strong institutions. And for me, India has now reached that point where it's going to develop very strongly.
So Ravi, one of the things that intrigues me as I look at our Digital India plan is that here we are trying to make people digitally literate and empower them digitally at a time when 2/3 of your adult population is actually illiterate. So what sort of challenges is this going to pose for any entrepreneur or any company that's trying to do or exploit the Digital India potential?
Yeah, I go back to the issue of jobs, okay? Because that's really the starting point for my response. The idea of training people and preparing them for jobs is very sort of old world, if you know what I mean. And also the idea of digital literacy has to change. I think the new paradigm has to be around mobile applications, okay? And it takes skill, but you don't need a whole lot of literacy in order to use a mobile app. So to me, the big idea is, can we empower people to become entrepreneurs? And the way you make them entrepreneurs is teach them how to build simple mobile and web apps, and then they can spot local opportunities and build an app for that, or build a small internet business.
I want to add one important point to what Ravi is saying. If jobs is the big concern for which Make in India is the answer, we need to step back and think about what is Make in India. We are moving away from make to do something with the information you have. So therefore, when you have to teach new skills to Indians, right? The new skills to India is not just about digital literacy, it is also about the ability to do something with the information which is going to be available, which is significantly higher complex task than creating BPO jobs and others. BPO jobs will help in the short term, but in the long term, if you want to create a competitive advantage, you will have to leapfrog your thinking on the next generation of skills.
We talk about 300 million internet users in the country, but if you talk about the user experience, I'm on 3G, but it still feels like 2G to me. So what is the problem? Is it spectrum? Is it bandwidth? I mean, what is the problem and how are we going to solve that?
The fact is that all the networks built in India were built around voice. They were not built around data. And the reality of voice is that 80% of the voice used to get consumed outdoors and 20% used to get consumed indoors. With data, it's absolutely the reverse. 80% gets used indoors and 20% gets used outdoors. But the entire layout of the networks in the country actually fire from outside in building and are unable to cover that in building problem, and therefore the networks have to redo themselves to actually get into indoors rather than outdoors. If you go to Singapore, if you go to Hong Kong, if you go to other developed countries of the world, do you see towers? You never get to see towers because everything has moved through small cells, in-building solutions, indoors, and therefore the data speeds that you get are very different. Indian operators are not going to get 30, 40, 50 megs of spectrum. And even if they're going to get 30, 50, 40 megs of spectrum at $2 billion or $3 billion for every 5 megs, where is there a business case? So I think that throws a challenge to everybody sitting here as well to say, can we now start innovating a bit differently from the rest of the world? The video will work in India, but video will not work at 2 GB speed. It will work probably at 256. Can we compress it? Can we come out with innovations? And I think there's a lot of innovation that will happen around here.
Right. So Anand, does that put you in a lucky spot where fiber will probably be what lights up our homes in terms of high-speed bandwidth?
It needs to be. See, the first vision statement of Digital India is infrastructure as a utility, high-speed internet as a utility. Exactly like you have a power grid or a national highway, set up a fiber grid, and then let the services roll on it. It's proven beyond doubt right now that on a voice road, you need to make data runways. Those data runways will nothing be but fiber. As soon as we start thinking of it as a utility and not a technology, the solutions will come out.
So what I'm going to do is ask my panelists to tell me 3 things each that you think are very critical for Digital India to really succeed. Let me start with Vineet.
Digital India is less to do with the hardware, more to do with the software. The world has moved on. So my recommendation is software, focus on coding, focus on digital the way it is, focus on information, and let information be available for people to build businesses on top of it, and that will create jobs.
Right. Satyan?
I think one point which I mentioned earlier, but I do think it's important, is that when we do have this access, it needs to be a neutral access. One of the concerns that we see today is that if you have 2 services and one of them is offered with free data or with faster speed or whatever it may be, you are reducing that sort of competitive, fair environment that spurs innovation. And I think in a market where you have constrained bandwidth, there's a lot of risk that that kind of situation can show up. And I think it's a critical thing that we make sure we enable that local entrepreneur to have as much of a chance to compete as that big internet company based in Delhi.
Sanjay, your 3 points?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't mince words to say access stands number 1 on my list. Without that, everything else is utopian. Second, I think clearly public-private partnerships. I don't believe that this can be rolled out by government agencies on their own. And finally, I think we need a very robust payment platform at the end of the day. We are a country with very limited credit cards. And if you don't have plastic all over and people are still struggling with bank accounts, I think you need a mechanism by which electronically people can actually pay for what they transact. And I think that is still very fragmented.
Okay. Anand?
Broadband needs to be defined as a utility. And second, I think it needs to be enablement of low-cost devices, whether it is done by importing or manufacturing or by sheer volumes.
Right. Jerome?
My first point is, having locally designed content, which is really applicable, as opposed to some sort of imported. So content, I think, is very important. Secondly, government which enables transparency and competition more than sort of planning. And most important of all, my third point, is really, in order to get the digital Dalit, to have use of affordable access, given what we've got. And that must mean public space Wi-Fi.
Okay. Ravi?
Well, if it's not obvious already, I'd say code for India.
Okay.
Number 2 would be access, and number 3 would be mandatory government services.
On that note, let me thank my panelists. I think each one of you has been wonderful. You really added tremendously to this session. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, let's give them a big round of applause, please.